This is the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Nick Miles, and at 14 hours GMT on Friday the 18th of June, these are our main stories. Health officials and politicians in Japan are in dispute over whether to allow spectators to attend the Olympic events in Tokyo next month. Iranians are voting to elect a new president, with all but one of the four candidates regarded as hardliners. After months of criticism, Israel has agreed to give the Palestinians at least 1 million COVID vaccines. Also in this podcast.
The pandemic has stopped almost everything except war, conflict, violence, persecution, all the causes that push these people to flee.
A tragic irony. In a year of lockdowns, refugee numbers spiral. Even at the best of times, hosting the Olympic Games is a bit of a poisoned chalice. It's great for the kudos of your nation, but it can often be a financial drain. The pandemic has made this far more complicated. Despite growing concerns about the spread of coronavirus, the organisers have doggedly carried on. Well, in a report today, Japan's most senior COVID advisor says banning all fans is the least risky and most desirable option. Meanwhile, in opening remarks at a meeting of experts on COVID-19 countermeasures, the president of the Tokyo Organising Committee, Seiko Hashimoto, said the aim was to find ways to hold the Games safely.
We would like to have a discussion today from the experts' perspective on how we can achieve a safe and secure Games. Based on your advice, we would like to implement solid measures.
What then to make of the situation? Rupert Wingfield-Hayes is our correspondent in Tokyo.
I think the impetus from the political leadership and from the leadership of the organising committee is towards having spectators. It appears pretty clear from what Mrs. Hashimoto has said and what Prime Minister Suga has said in the last few days that they want these games to have people in stadiums, albeit not in the normal circumstances. I think they're very much open to limiting spectators. That's what's going on in Japan at the moment. Sporting events have been going on in Japan with a maximum of 5,000 people in stadiums for really throughout the pandemic. And they seem to believe that the measures they put in place mean that they can do that with the Olympics as well, and that they can do so safely without the threat to public health. That does, however, seem to go very much in the face of the expert advice that we've heard from today. So, in that respect, there is definitely a conflict between the political leadership and the scientific leadership here.
Yeah, and it makes the politicians pretty nervous, I imagine. It's a bit of a hostage to fortune, particularly when still, even though public opinion is changing to a certain extent, still a lot of people in Japan just don't want the Games to go ahead at all.
Yeah, we had a situation before over the last few months where around 80%, between 70 and 80% of people in Japan either said they didn't want the Games to go ahead or they wanted them postponed another year. So about 40%, those two views. Now it's shifted somewhat to about a third saying they still don't want the Games to go ahead, a third saying they want it to go ahead but with no spectators, and then a smaller number, around 20%, saying you can go ahead with limited spectators. So public opinion has shifted, but you can still see there's a great deal of suspicion, fear and anxiety about the Games going ahead during the pandemic.
Rupert Wingfield-Hayes. During President Hassan Rouhani's 8 years in office, Iran's economy has continued to worsen and relations with the West have deteriorated too. Now, Iranians are voting for a new president. The country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, cast the first ballot and appealed for people to go to the polls.
Election Day is a day of the Iranian nation. Today, people are the main actors and stage directors. With their participation, the country achieves great advantages in the international arena. But the first to benefit are the people themselves.
This woman told us that she'd voted for the candidate expected to win, Ibrahim Raisi.
I voted for Mr. Raisi. As Chief of Judiciary, he proved himself and fought corruption, which is a big issue in our country. I voted for the most qualified candidate, and I hope he can also save our economy, which is in a very bad state.
Well, Kazra Naji from the BBC's Persian service says that voter turnout is expected to be low.
My own judgment, my own impression is that there will probably be a lower turnout than usual, and that is because a lot of people have boycotted these elections because they say there's no real choice for them in these elections. The Constitutional Guardian Council has limited the number of people, the candidates, to mostly hardliners of various shades, and basically paving the way for one of the most hardline of them to win the elections, the present head of the judiciary, Ebrahim Raisi. So on the whole, there is this general impression that this is a power grab by the hardliners because they've come to the conclusion perhaps that they're not going to win in a free and fair elections, and they have decided that they will boycott the elections.
Kazra, I suppose many people around the world are looking at the election, say that with great interest because of the nuclear deal, because of tensions in the region. How could the result affect those tensions and the possible renewal of the deal?
I think the way it's going and the fact that it's almost certain that Mr. Raisi will be the next president and the hardliners will control all centers of power in Iran, I think it's fair to say that we're going to have a period of greater tension between Iran and the West in the years to come. Iran will be looking more towards China for investment that it desperately needs, hundreds of billions of dollars, they hope. And in the region, I think there will be more of the same in the sense that these people, the hardliners, want to extend Shiism in the areas in Arab countries that are mostly Sunni and project power in these areas. So we will see more of the same on that front.
Kazra Naji. Tomorrow, Saturday in America, it is Juneteenth, which celebrates the end of slavery in the United States. As of one day ago, thanks to a bill signed into law by President Biden, it's a federal holiday. In New York, many lampposts, billboards and mailboxes have been plastered with stickers to let residents know that they were named after slave owners. A group of activists has launched the campaign to bring more awareness to the history and legacy of slavery. The BBC's Tom Brooke reports from New York.
Okay, black on black. Comedian and activist Elsa Waith listens to the song Black by the artist Buddy while spearheading the Slavers of New York stealth campaign to let Brooklyn residents know that Nostrand Avenue, where Elsa is standing, is named after the Nostrand family, who were slave owners. Elsa affixes a sticker stating this fact to a utility box.
A lot of people who live in and around these streets don't know who it's named for, how the street got its name, and so we are here to simply provide more information.
It's not necessarily common knowledge, but many prominent New York City thoroughfares, landmarks and institutions are named after slave owners, figures such as Peter Stuyvesant, John Lefferts and John Van Nostrand. This is what's being revealed by this project. Part of the Slavers of New York team is Maria Robles.
Knowledge is power. I think one of the reasons that racism, specifically anti-blackness, continues to be so pervasive is because there has not been a real reckoning with the history of slavery.
But what do New York City residents make of this stealth sticker campaign?
Before today, I did not know that Nostrand Avenue was named after a slave owner. It'll just give us a little bit of insight.
I appreciate this because it actually brings awareness to the community, which I think still suffers from slavery.
But some passers-by are a little more sceptical, wondering perhaps if the campaign is part of a broader effort to change street names so they no longer belong to slave owners.
Yeah, this is so far back, sometimes maybe it's irrelevant. Maybe we should change every street name, every town.
But Slavers of New York is adamant. As a stealth education campaign, they're not advocating any specific action, like changing the names of streets. Elsa Waith again.
The goal of Slavers of New York is actually just to provide information. Once the community is informed, they can decide what they want to do.
Some people have described what you do as vandalism. I mean, you have defaced that light pole there with your sticker, haven't you?
There's street art everywhere. There are posters everywhere. If this is bothering somebody, I would like to actually know why. When you live in a place that is full of street art and expression.
Orange is the new black.
This Slavers of New York campaign, with other awareness-raising endeavours, is changing the image of New York as a relatively benign player in the history of slavery. The South has long been seen as the region where slavery was most entrenched. But one survey shows that in the 18th century, 42% of New York households had slaves. Slavers of New York is letting people know just how much slavery was an intimate, if uncomfortable, part of their history.
Black.
Tom Brooke reporting. Now, a new species of ancient giant rhino, which would have been up to 10 times heavier than its modern counterpart, has been discovered in northwestern China. Paraceratherium lynxiense lived about 26 million years ago. Details from the BBC's Warren Bull.
In 2015, fossils were discovered near Wangjiachuan village in the Chinese province of Gansu. A research team from Beijing soon realised that these were not from one of the known species of giant rhino. Paraceratherium lynxiense had a distinctive slender skull, as well as a prehensile nose trunk, similar to that of the modern tapir. The hornless creature's head could reach 7 metres to graze treetops, making it taller than a giraffe. The scientists found that the new species was closely related to giant rhinos that once lived in Pakistan, suggesting it had travelled across Central Asia.
Warren Bull. Still to come on this podcast, we have failed. The UK government apologises for the low conviction rate for rape. Survivors say that's not enough.
If they want to kind of make this any better for those victims who have been through this, then reopen their cases.
And a former government minister in Japan is sent to jail for buying votes to help elect his wife. Israel says that it will give the Palestinians at least 1 million coronavirus vaccines, following criticism that it hasn't done enough to help immunisation efforts in the occupied territories. It will hand over jabs that are close to their expiry dates, which it doesn't need at the moment. And in return, the Palestinians will give Israel a similar quantity of Pfizer vaccines that it's expecting later this year. Russia, meanwhile, has recorded its highest ever number of daily infections. For months, the government has downplayed the pandemic, suggesting that the country has all but defeated the virus. But it's now battling a surge of cases. In Moscow, new daily cases have trebled in the last 2 weeks to more than 9,000, and further restrictions have been announced. Well, in response, the Kremlin has blamed the outbreak on nihilism. I heard more from Vitaly Shevchenko from BBC Monitoring.
There's a lot of concern coming from Russian officials now. There's talk of explosive growth in the number of new cases, which, according to the health minister, Mikhail Murashko, has jumped by 30% in just 1 week. Yesterday, Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin was talking to officials at a meeting, and he described the situation as extremely difficult. And this sort of alarm is echoed by state TV, which has been broadcasting direct calls on Russians to get vaccinated. In fact, on some of the main channels, that's how presenters sign off now: go and get vaccinated.
OK, so they're sounding the alarm, figures are going up, get vaccinated. They're blaming nihilism. What do they mean by that?
Well, this may be an example of how careless talk costs lives. They're saying that the public is ignoring coronavirus restrictions and is unwilling to get vaccinated. But let's have a look at how this happened. For months, Russians had been told by Kremlin-controlled media how successful their country is at battling the coronavirus, while the West was described as failing miserably. People were dying left, right, and centre, especially in Europe. And people were said to be confused about what's going on. There were reports of endless rioting and vaccine shortages. In fact, Western vaccines were described as part of the problem, supposedly causing more deaths. And then state TV would say, meanwhile in Russia, everything's fine. Restrictions are being lifted. Shopping centres and museums are opening. Students are going back to their universities, and vaccination is proceeding at pace. Only television would somehow never say how many Russians exactly have got vaccinated or how many have died because of the virus, because it's been all but defeated, supposedly. So This is probably the key reason why Russians are so distrustful of vaccines. And this is also an example of the limits that the state propaganda machine has, is just struggling to get Russians to go and get vaccinated.
Vitaly Shevchenko. The United Nations says that the number of refugees around the world hit a new record last year in spite of the pandemic. And more than 2/3 of those who fled abroad came from just 5 countries: Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan, South Sudan and Myanmar. Many were also displaced within Africa because of the conflicts in Mozambique, Ethiopia's Tigray region and the Central Sahel. Filippo Grandi is the UN High Commissioner for Refugees.
We went from 79.5 million people forcibly displaced in 2019 to 82.4 million in 2020. And I find this remarkable that in a year in which we were all locked down, we couldn't move, we had to stay at home, we were told that not to travel, still almost 3 million more people were forcibly displaced. It also shows that the pandemic has stopped almost everything except war, conflict, violence, persecution, all the causes that push these people to flee.
That kind of suggests to me the world isn't really listening to you. We've just seen the G7 a week or so ago. I didn't see any mention of refugees in the final statement.
The rich and powerful countries seem to wake up to refugee issues only when they touch their borders. I'm in the US now. Here, there is quite a lot of attention for the Mexican border because there's a huge problem there. And when I started as High Commissioner in 2016, the G7 was very focused because Europe was hit by a wave of people. But this is so short-sighted. And frankly, it's a little bit like with climate change, pandemic before this one. Global challenges don't seem to get that type of strategic response. You said I'm not listened to. Frankly, unfortunately, it's true. I'm quite used to it. We'll keep insisting because this is not just about values, humanitarianism, human rights. It's, of course, about all of that, but it's also about self-interest. The pandemic has shown us that if we don't respond together, then these problems come back to haunt everybody.
You mentioned self-interest there. What do you think about the moves by some countries? I'm thinking of Denmark most recently, to say, yeah, of course, we'll take refugees, we'll take asylum seekers, but we'll kind of outsource them to another country.
I think very negatively about this. I think it is one more manifestation of a trend that we've seen in recent years to say, let's build a wall, let's push them back at sea. And now the latest, let's externalize asylum. This is almost a colonial approach to buy asylum mechanism in other countries. But all of this is not only morally reprehensible, frankly, abysmally reprehensible on the part of rich and privileged countries, but it is also not effective. And this is where self-interest also plays a role. These movements will continue no matter what, but they will be more and more illegal, more and more irregular, more and more difficult to manage. Instead of building proper procedures to receive, to distribute, to integrate, and to send back those that are not eligible. All of this should be the focus of rich countries. And often it is not, because bad politicians push them in the wrong direction.
Filippo Grandi, UN High Commissioner for Refugees, speaking to our Geneva correspondent, Imogen Folks. A Japanese former justice minister, Katsuyuki Kawai, has been sent to prison for 3 years for buying votes to help his wife get elected to national office. Here's our Asia-Pacific editor, Michael Bristow.
Katsuyuki Kawai handed out more than $250,000 to 100 politicians and supporters to help his wife Anri get elected to Japan's upper house 2 years ago. She won, but has since resigned. She's also been convicted of vote buying, for which she received a suspended jail sentence. Mr. Kawai was Justice Minister for just over a month in 2019, before stepping down when this scandal was uncovered. Japanese prosecutors described the case as massive and unprecedented.
Michael Bristow. The UK government has apologised to rape survivors for low conviction rates, saying it's not good enough. Officials are now pledging to make changes to the system, as Charlotte Gallagher reports.
The figures are stark. Between 2019 and 2020, just over 1,400 people were convicted of rape or lesser offences, the lowest number since records began, despite reports of adult rape to police almost doubling in the previous 5 years. But while 13% of suspects were charged between 2015 and 2016, that number was just 3% between 2019 and 2020. Robert Buckland is the Justice Secretary.
I'm apologising to everybody for the position that we have got to. Whilst there have been a number of important and successful prosecutions, the overall numbers are just not enough.
So why has the situation got so bad? One reason is the way in which women and men who report rapes are treated. They may have to hand over their phones so their messages and social media accounts can be scrutinised, unlike other victims of crime. Some survivors blame a lack of support from authorities and the fear of being cross-examined in court and having their sexual history used against them. An official review also questions how the justice system, the police and prosecutors tackle the cases. Vera Baird is the Victims Commissioner for England and Wales.
It seems to me inevitably that the ministers are apologising for the fact that when people complain of rape, they cease to be serious citizens and become slightly dodgy people who may have been flirting and have to be investigated thoroughly to see if they merit the police and the CPS supporting them. That's what it seems to me they're apologising for.
One of the planned changes is police and prosecutors putting greater emphasis on understanding a suspect's behaviour rather than focusing on a victim's credibility. The government also says people who report rape should have their phones returned to them after 24 hours. Currently, they can be waiting months. Officials are also considering if survivors should be allowed to give evidence by video and be spared the additional trauma of giving evidence in court. Catherine Araniello is a rape survivor and says the proposals aren't enough.
An apology is worth nothing to me. Unless they're actually going to change. Do you know what a real, if they want to kind of make this any better for those victims who have been through this, then reopen their cases, because they know that they've let 98% of rapists free.
One rape charity says the plans are a missed opportunity and lack any big commitments.
Charlotte Gallagher. It's time now for our weekly news from elsewhere, when we talk about some of the less reported stories from around the world. I'm joined by Martin Morgan from BBC Monitoring, which listens to foreign media. Hello, Martin. First, let's start off. A portal that lets you travel through time and space is the stuff, obviously, of science fiction, but I hear in Lithuania it has one that at least gives you a glimpse of a life in another city.
That's right, yes. There's a circular window with large screens and cameras in the capital, Vilnius, and it broadcasts live views from a similar portal in the city of Lublin in Poland. You can stand in front of it and greet people at the other end as if they were only a few meters away. It's proved very popular because of the COVID travel restrictions, and the designers are planning more portals of this kind in London and Iceland. That's very intriguing. Let's move on now to the golden coach of the Dutch royal family, going on display in a museum in Amsterdam. Why do people think that it may stay there? Well, the coach has ferried the royals on ceremonial occasions since the late 19th century, but more recently it's been at the centre of controversy. One of the panels shows colonial subjects paying homage to the royal family, and many people in the former colonies and back home too think that this is no longer appropriate. The coach has been newly restored, and many media commentators think it may never be used again. The royal family has more than one coach after all. I suppose it does. Finally, let's stay in the Netherlands to ask why we shouldn't be afraid of the big bad wolf. Well, a wildlife survey has tried to calm fears that the country's new population of wolves will wreak havoc on farm animals. It says there have only been 9 wolf attacks this year on farmyard animals, hardly more than those carried out by dogs and foxes. But farmers are unconvinced, and they want electrified fences to be put up to protect their land from the wolves, who moved into the country from Germany 2 years ago. For one thing, a wolf recently managed to leap over a high fence in a national park, much to the surprise of these official wolf watchers.
Sure it was. Martin, many thanks. That was Martin Morgan. And that is all from us for now, but there will be an updated version of the Global News podcast later on. If you want to comment on this podcast or the topics that we've covered in it, you can send us an email. The address, as usual, is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. Today's studio manager was Robbie Hayward, the producer, Alison Davis, and the editor is Karen Martin. I'm Nick Miles, and until next time, goodbye.
This is the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Gareth Barlow, and in the early hours of Friday the 18th of June, these are our main stories. Barack Obama has said his Affordable Care Act is here to stay after the US Supreme Court dismissed the latest legal challenge by Republican-controlled states. One of the pioneers of Africa's struggle for independence, Zambia's founding president, Kenneth Kaunda, has died. And an international donor conference has been held in Paris to help the Lebanese army survive the country's economic crisis. Also in this podcast,
this ancient fish dates back 420 million years, evolving long before the dinosaurs and surviving the shifting of continents and the asteroid strike that wiped out much of life on Earth.
A new study has discovered that a rare deep-sea fish can live for up to 100 years, which is 5 times longer than previously thought. The US Supreme Court has upheld the law which aims to provide affordable health insurance for all Americans. The judges dismissed a legal challenge from Texas and 17 other Republican-governed states. This is the third time since 2010 that the Affordable Care Act, the signature policy of former President Barack Obama, has survived a challenge. The Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Democrat Nancy Pelosi, gave her reaction to the ruling.
We are, of course, happy with the Supreme Court decision on the Affordable Care Act. I think it's really important to note this historic decision. Today's Supreme Court decision is a landmark victory.
I heard more from the BBC's North American correspondent, David Willis.
This is the third time in just over a decade that the US Supreme Court, the highest court in the land here in the United States, has been called upon to consider a challenge to the Affordable Care Act. It's the third time the court has rejected such a challenge, added to which the majorities on the 9-member court are getting larger in its favour, despite Donald Trump having appointed more conservative judges. On this occasion, 7 of the 9 judges ruled in its favour. You may remember, of course, that Republicans also tried to overturn the law in Congress when they controlled both houses. Those efforts also failed. The upshot of all this is that it seems the Affordable Care Act is here to stay, despite the considerable opposition that Republicans continue to harbour for it.
What's been the reaction to this ruling? I see President Obama has released a statement.
He has indeed, and he weighed in on this, saying that the ruling reaffirmed that the Affordable Care Act was here to stay, as he put it. President Biden issued a statement as well. He called the ruling a major victory for all Americans benefiting from the law. And this is also, of course, Gareth, a victory for him personally, having made access to improved healthcare central to his agenda. And he has also promised to use his executive powers where he can to expand the provisions of the Affordable Care Act. He said today it's time to move forward and keep building on this landmark law.
And briefly then, what does that mean in practice for ordinary Americans?
Well, it means that they will continue, about 31 million Americans so far will continue to receive this cover provided under the Affordable Care Act. And the law basically gave millions of low-income Americans access to medical insurance by virtue of banning health insurance companies from denying coverage to those with so-called pre-existing conditions.
David Willis reporting there. One of the giants of Africa's liberation struggles, Kenneth Kaunda, has died in Zambia at the age of 97. He'd been admitted to hospital in Lusaka earlier this week, suffering from pneumonia. In the 1950s, Mr. Kaunda was a key figure in what was then Northern Rhodesia's independence movement from Britain. He became Zambia's first president in 1964 and led the country through decades of one-party rule. Mr. Kaunda was a strong supporter of efforts to end apartheid in South Africa. He was also a leading backer of liberation movements in Mozambique and what is now Zimbabwe. Patricia Golding, who was the BBC's correspondent in Zambia towards the end of President Kaunda's time in office, looks back at his life.
And now the new flag of Zambia has gone up.
The 24th of October 1964, and Zambia becomes the 9th African state to gain independence from Britain. The father of the new nation then, and for the next 27 years, was Kenneth Kaunda, whose name became almost interchangeable with that of the country.
People of Zambia, of all races, and those who believe in and have a true friendship for our new state. Let us remember today our national motto: one Zambia, one nation. One Zambia, one nation.
Affectionately known as KK, he was a paternal figure, a vegetarian and a non-drinker. He was rarely seen without his familiar handkerchief and would openly cry when moved. The son of a Presbyterian minister and a teacher, he grew up with missionaries, and as the former Secretary-General of the Commonwealth, Sir Sonny Ramphal, recalls, religion imbued his entire life.
He was deeply religious, not only religious in a Christian way. He was open in an ecumenical way, even to Hinduism. That's part of what I describe as his goodness. And yet he was a hard-nosed politician.
Kenneth Kaunda entered politics in the early 1950s, one of a group of young African leaders who demanded complete independence from the colonial powers. After a spell in prison for subversion, he was elected president of the United National Independence Party, UNIP, which won the pre-independence general election and became the governing party. Tiende Pamodzi, Forward Together, the song that preceded most addresses by the president, who loved to sing. At first, Zambia did move forward. In 1964, it was one of Africa's more successful economies, supported by its huge copper reserves. Soon, the mines and many other companies were nationalised. The government provided free social services and subsidised food. But by the mid-1970s, these policies, combined with the world oil crisis and the falling price of copper, sent the Zambian economy on a downward spiral. Corruption, mismanagement, and a shortage of foreign currency to buy spare parts added to the problems. And Zambians also paid an economic price for their country's support of regional independence movements. The African National Congress had its headquarters in Lusaka, and the Zambian president's unstinting support.
You can count on Zambia in your long and bitter struggle to make South Africa a country that is not denied to any of its citizens.
Throughout his rule, Kenneth Kaunda played a major role in the fight against white minority rule across southern Africa. Opposition movements from what is now Zimbabwe, from Mozambique and Namibia also found refuge in Zambia. At Commonwealth meetings, Kenneth Kaunda was pivotal in promoting sanctions against South Africa. Visiting Lusaka shortly after his release from prison, Nelson Mandela thanked the Zambian people and appealed for their continuing support.
We are counting on your commitment to help us see the struggle through to its bitter end.
In 1972, Kenneth Kaunda had declared Zambia a one-party state. By the mid-1980s, his style was increasingly authoritarian. Newspapers were controlled, and he brooked little dissent. Further economic decline forced the government to take emergency financial measures. Food riots and an attempted coup followed. The mood had changed. The opposition was no longer afraid to speak out, and in 1990, Kenneth Kaunda was forced to reintroduce multi-party politics. In elections the following year, KK and UNIP were roundly defeated.
I tried to do my very best for Zambia. This is the nature of multi-party politics.
You win some and you lose some elections.
By the end of Kenneth Kaunda's rule, people were tired of the rhetoric and the country was impoverished. Yet most Zambians remember KK with affection as the father of the nation. They recall the stand he took against white rule in Zambia and beyond, and note that he achieved his aim of a country not driven by ethnic differences. Truly, as he so often said,
One Zambia! One Zambia!
That report by Patricia Golding. The former president of Ivory Coast, Laurent Gbagbo, has returned home after nearly a decade overseas. During that time, he was tried and cleared of crimes against humanity over the violence following the election he lost in 2010. The BBC's Lala Sai in Abidjan was watching Mr. Gbagbo's arrival.
The plane arrived a little bit late, but when it arrived eventually, we could see Laurent Gbagbo getting down with the mask on. We could see that he's an older man now. He was walking slowly and being carried a little bit by people helping him around him. There was a crowd, but not as much as we expected, because in the morning, the people that wanted to go to the airport were stopped by the police. They were tear gassed, so they couldn't access the airport. But there were officials, MPs, and traditional chiefs.
Lala Sai in Ivory Coast. There have been reports for some time that the leader of the northern Nigerian jihadist group Boko Haram was dead. Abubakar Shekau led thousands of fighters for more than a decade when a rival Islamic group claimed they had killed him in a battle a couple of weeks ago. Now a video has been circulated in which the militants admit their commander has died. The confirmation of Abubakar Shekau's death came as the President Muhammadu Buhari visited the northeastern city of Maiduguri and pledged to defeat the group.
The defense and security agencies should rest assured of the federal government's unalloyed commitment to winning the battle against terror and criminality. By pulling together the collective resources of the armed forces and other security agencies, we hope the enemy will now feel the ferocity of our firepower.
Nigeria is a mosaic of insecurity, with oil installations and their workers targeted in the southern Niger Delta, repeated high-profile attacks carried out on schools, as well as clashes between semi-nomadic herdsmen and farmers over land and resources. But it's the scourge of Boko Haram that's been the most high-profile threat to Nigeria's security, as well as to neighbouring countries. I spoke to our Africa regional editor, Will Ross, and asked him about the video.
This was a fairly short video clip in which a man is reading from a piece of paper in Arabic. Now, we believe this is Bakura Modu, also known as Sahlaba, and people are suggesting that this is now the new leader of Boko Haram following the death of Abubakar Shekau. In the clip, he urges his faction's commanders to stay loyal despite the loss of Abubakar Shekau, and he also says that Boko Haram commanders should reject the commander of the rival Islamic State West Africa province, or ISWAP, that's Abu Musab al-Barnawi. So in this clip, he's really calling for Boko Haram to remain strong at a time when they've clearly been under some pressure. And of course, it was last month that ISWAP's al-Barnawi said that Shekau had killed himself while on the run from ISWAP fighters following a clash between the two rival jihadist groups.
Will they manage, though, to remain strong? Like you say, this rallying cry by this new leader, what will it mean for the group?
Well, it's very difficult to predict. What is clear is that all of the jihadists operating in northeast Nigeria are causing a great deal of misery for the civilian population. This has been going on since 2009, but soon after the initial reports came out of Shekau's death, there were some suggestions of further fighting between the two groups as the Islamic State West Africa province group was trying to get Boko Haram commanders to switch sides, as it were, and join their ranks. So we'll have to see in the coming weeks how this plays out. I mean, some people hope that with the two sides fighting each other, it might benefit the Nigerian military. But what we're also seeing is the ISWAP group has been going after military targets and trying to win over the civilian population, which is something that certainly Shekau's faction didn't do. It was a very brutal group, has been a very brutal group, of course, responsible for the abduction of the Chibok schoolgirls and many, many attacks on civilians, unarmed civilians, whereas ISWAP seems to be trying to convince the civilian population that it's a force worth supporting, and that could be a problem for the Nigerian military.
The BBC's Will Ross. France has hosted a donor conference to try and help Lebanon's armed forces survive the country's increasingly dire economic crisis. The gathering included European states, the US, Russia and some Gulf Arab nations. Our Middle East analyst Alan Johnston reports.
All of Lebanon is suffering as the nation's economy collapses, and the army is no exception. Its chief told the donor conference that the situation was increasingly untenable. The slashing of the value of wages has forced some soldiers to seek extra jobs or leave the military altogether. Countries attending the conference were asked to help supply the army with food, fuel, medical supplies and equipment.
Alan Johnston. Still to come on the podcast.
Because it is saving my life, it's awesome having it.
We speak to a woman who's had a special heart-starting device fitted, just like the one the Danish footballer Christian Eriksen is going to have. An inquiry into an Islamist bomb attack and an Ariana Grande pop concert in the British city of Manchester 4 years ago has found that local security teams missed chances to stop it. The inquiry chairman, John Saunders, said the bomber, Salman Abedi, should have been identified as a threat and action taken. 22 people were killed and hundreds wounded when he blew himself up in the lobby of the arena. From Manchester, here's our correspondent, Nick Garnett.
It's 4 years since the Manchester Arena bomb, 9 months since the public inquiry began, and today, the first report, focusing on events before the explosion and the security arrangements in place around the Ariana Grande concert at which 22 people were murdered. The report highlights a litany of missed opportunities and catastrophic failures. Sir John Saunders is the chairman of the inquiry.
Everybody concerned with security at the arena should have been doing their job in the knowledge that a terrorist attack might occur on that night. They weren't. No one believed it could happen to them.
The report focuses its criticism on 3 organisations. The foyer of the arena came into the control of British Transport Police. There was a lack of leadership, and all 5 officers on duty failed to follow clear instructions on what was expected of them. One officer was supposed to be in the foyer at the beginning and end of the concert, in case they were needed. They were all in the train station next door. That failing meant there was no police officer on hand when a member of the public became suspicious of a man crouched in a corner with a rucksack on his back. He raised the alarm with a steward but told the inquiry he felt he was simply fobbed off. The arena's operator, SMG, is also singled out for criticism. Its risk assessment before the event was a box-ticking exercise, and the bomber was able to hide for 58 minutes in a blind spot not covered by CCTV. The training provided by the company that provided security, Shosec, was inadequate. Staff working for Shosec didn't do what they should have done. The organisations criticised say they will study the report's findings carefully. One of those who was killed in the attack was Martin Hett. His father, Paul Hett, voiced his despair at the catalogue of failures.
We were heartbroken to think Martin was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Today, our heartbreak turns to anger. We entrusted the safety of our loved ones into organisations and agencies who had a duty of care to protect them. This inquiry has rightly found that we were failed on every level.
Sir John Saunders' report highlighted the work of Martin's mother, Fegan Murray, who's campaigning for a new law which will require public places and venues to improve security. She's being helped by Nick Aldworth, who's a former counter-terrorism coordinator for the Metropolitan Police.
I think this is a generational opportunity. I can't think of another piece of legislation that will change the security landscape so significantly and, I hope, so dramatically.
The inquiry into the Manchester Arena bombing is continuing. 2 more reports on the role of the security services and the emergency services response will be published in due course.
That report by Nick Garnett. There were dramatic political developments in Northern Ireland on Thursday evening. Less than a month after becoming leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, Edwin Poots has resigned, throwing the region's biggest party into disarray. At issue is Mr Poots' choice as First Minister, as well as a stalemate over Irish language laws. From Belfast, here's Dan Johnson.
Edwin, can you tell us what happened in there? Did you face a motion of no confidence? Are you still leader of the party?
There were no answers as Edwin Poots and other DUP politicians left a meeting, but he'd lost authority and the next move seemed inevitable. At 9 o'clock, Mr Poots released a statement saying he'd asked the party chairman to commence the leadership election process for the second time in just over a month. Going into the meeting, this was the strength of feeling amongst DUP figures like MP Sammy Wilson.
You can't lead people who are not following you. So if you have no followers, you can't be a leader, can you?
I call Mr Edwin Poots to nominate a member of the Assembly to be the First Minister.
Only a few hours earlier, Edwin Poots had proposed his preferred candidate Paul Givan as First Minister at Stormont.
I'm proud to nominate today, not with a precondition from Sinn Féin, but with a brand of confident unionism, capable of recognising wins and even recognising those things that do not do us demonstrable harm.
But far from a win, the DUP leader failed to spot an own goal, the demonstrable harm his party would see in the deal he reached to secure Sinn Féin's crucial support by agreeing to introduce new laws to protect and promote the Irish language. DUP politicians weren't happy and told him not to proceed. When he did, the rebellion came quickly and confidence evaporated. Edwin Poots said it had been a difficult period for the party. It leaves the DUP and unionism badly fractured.
Dan Johnson in Northern Ireland. Staying in the UK, and the government has confirmed that all people aged 18 and over in England will be able to book a coronavirus vaccination from today. The announcement follows a warning from scientists that COVID-19 cases are increasing rapidly, with much of the growth driven by infections in younger adults who haven't yet received a jab. The vaccination programme is already open to all adults in Northern Ireland and Wales. This is also the case in parts of Glasgow, with people aged over 30 being invited for jabs in the rest of Scotland. Our health correspondent Anna Collinson has been looking at the latest research.
While this analysis by Imperial College London suggests there has been a rise in coronavirus cases in England, the researchers say there's also comfort in their findings. Most people in the older age groups who are more at risk of serious illness have now received 2 vaccine doses and appear to have very good protection. Professor Paul Elliott directs the REACT study and says most cases are now among children and younger adults.
The infection is really highest in the under 24-year-old group, and the infection's continuing to spread and continuing to have an exponential growth. And what we really need to do is to turn that growth down. And the way to do that is to vaccinate the younger adult population.
Data from Public Health England also found a rise in cases across all age groups last week, most significantly among those in their 20s. The latest surveillance report says there's also been an increase across all regions of England, with the North West seeing the highest numbers, followed by the North East. While many welcome the opportunity for all adults in England to be able to book their vaccines, this afternoon the UK has recorded a further 11,000 coronavirus cases, the highest daily figure since mid-February. England's Chief Medical Officer, Professor Chris Whitty, has warned there's currently a further surge of the virus, and while its magnitude is uncertain, he says it will lead to further deaths.
Anna Collinson. Officials in Sri Lanka say a container ship which caught fire last month just outside the port of Colombo has now completely sunk. The ship became the object of a special operation amid fears of an environmental disaster. Here's our South Asia editor, Jill McGivering.
It's now nearly 4 weeks since the Express Pearl caught fire outside port, raising concerns about the environmental damage if the ship and its containers of chemicals weren't recovered quickly. Since then, it's broken in 2 and come to rest on the seabed 21 metres below the surface. Officials say there's little hope of recovering the wreck until after the monsoon. The ship was carrying around 1,500 containers, including 25 tonnes of nitric acid. In recent days, the carcasses of turtles, dolphins and a whale have washed ashore, deaths which some experts attribute to the accident.
Jill McGivering. In football, a minute's applause was held during Denmark's Euro 2020 match against Belgium as a show of support for the Danish midfielder Christian Eriksen. He's recovering in hospital after suffering a cardiac arrest on the pitch at the weekend. Belgium kicked the ball out of play in the 10th minute so all players, fans and officials could join in with the gesture. The timing was chosen because Eriksen wears the number 10 shirt. Earlier, we heard that Christian Eriksen will be fitted with a heart-starting device called an ICD, or implantable cardioverter defibrillator. The head of research at the Danish Heart Foundation and a professor of cardiology, Gunnar G. Larsen, explained how it works.
It's like a monitor. It monitors the rhythm of the heart. And for most people, they will never have to use it. But for those who maybe have a serious cardiac arrhythmia or a cardiac arrest, the ICD can detect it and respond on it. It can do what we call anti-tachycardic pacing, where it tries to override the fast heart rhythm and in that way take control of the rhythm of the heart and then slowly go down and restore normal heart rhythm. And if it doesn't succeed with that, it will give a shock like a normal defibrillator from outside, and it will try to regenerate a normal heart rhythm again in that way. So it's a life-saving device for those who have a serious cardiac arrhythmia or rhythm disturbances or cardiac arrest.
So that's how they work, but what's it like to have an ICD? Carney Sharp spoke to Abigail Smythe, who's in Kingston, Jamaica. She's 28 years old and has had an ICD since she was 19.
Firstly, because it is saving my life. It's awesome having it. That's the biggest upside to it. It's a safety net. It prevents me from going into cardiac arrest. So it's pretty cool having it, you know.
Tell us why you have one.
In my case, I have a rare and progressive heart disease called arrhythmogenic right ventricular dysplasia. And one of the symptoms it presents is that I have dangerously abnormal heart rhythms that puts me at great risk of going into cardiac arrest. So that's the main reason I have the ICD.
Tell us what life was like before you had the ICD and what's it like after.
Before getting the ICD, before my official diagnosis, I was having signs and symptoms of a heart disease since I was like 8 years old. And from 8 years old up to 19 years old, I was having abnormal heart rhythms, shortness of breath, dizziness, lightheadedness, sharp chest pains, and all of that. Since getting the ICD, my quality of life has improved. And this ICD has actually saved my life several times, preventing me from going into cardiac arrest.
And I heard via producer Luke, who called you up, he said that you had said that you were watching this match on Saturday.
Yes.
I was watching it too. What was your reaction?
Firstly, because of my situation, I knew exactly what it was. The moment I saw him collapse, I knew it was cardiac arrest. And I was just praying and hoping that they got to him in time to save his life. And I knew then and there that he would have been getting an ICD, you know, and I'm happy he's okay. And now that he'll be getting an ICD, he will have a safety net to prevent this from happening to him again.
Abigail Smythe, and Denmark lost the game against Belgium 2-1. A new study has discovered that a rare deep-sea fish can live up to 100 years, which is 5 times longer than previously thought. The coelacanth was once thought to be extinct, as scientists had only known about its existence from fossils. However, 2 populations were discovered off eastern Africa and the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, as Helen Briggs reports.
This ancient fish dates back 420 million years, evolving long before the dinosaurs and surviving the shifting of continents and the asteroid strike that wiped out much of life on Earth. Dwelling in caves on the ocean floor, the coelacanth can grow to 6 foot long, tipping the scales at more than 200 pounds. But it's not just the animal's size that's impressive. Researchers estimate the fish can live for up to 100 years, making it one of the most long-lived species in the sea, alongside deep-sea sharks. And it breeds late in life, with pregnancies lasting as long as 5 years. French researchers say these new pieces of information are essential to the conservation and management of coelacanths. Slow-growing fish that produce few young are particularly vulnerable to extinction pressures. The African population is already critically endangered, with possibly only a few hundred individuals left.
The BBC's Helen Briggs. And that's all from us for now, but there will be an updated version of the Global News podcast later on. If you want to comment on this one or any of the topics we've covered in it, do send us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. The studio manager was Frank McWeeny, the producer was Liam McSheffrey, the editor is Karen Martin. I'm Gareth Barlow. Until next time, goodbye.
Can you help us to solve a case that's remained a mystery for over 50 years?
There are somebody living who knows more about this case.
With the help of our listeners, the Death in Ice Valley podcast has been trying to work out the identity of a woman found dead in a remote Norwegian valley.
Lots of these little facts were sort of coming together and seeming really interesting.
But after a lot of promising leads, we still don't have an answer.
I went everywhere I could.
So that's where we need your help. Someone still alive today must know who this woman was.
Your person's cover story was Alitalia stewardess, right? Which is a very glamorous job to have at that time, but it's also a great cover story.
All the background you need is in the podcast Death in Ice Valley from the BBC World Service and NRK.
I don't know if I'll be more disappointed when the story is finally resolved, because then there won't be anything else to figure out.
Search for Death in Ice Valley wherever you get your podcasts.